What is the 120 side of the past?
Oh,
You can just cut off the-
yeah, I will do that. Hold on. Thank you.
Oh, no, no.
Stop.
the last
Stop video. Okay.
All right, we will call to order the joint work session of the Zoning Ordinance Review Committee and the Plan and Zoning Commission on June 6, 2022 at 7 p.m. First item on the agenda is a roll call. I'll just go, rather than list off all the names, I'll just go around to everyone to state who's present.
Sandy Phillips, City Council.
Pickett Lane, Plan and Zoning. Kristen Spencer, City Ordinance.
Amber with the town planning and zoning and ordinance.
Dan Noonan, Planning and Zoning.
And Kevin Sullivan, Planning and Zoning. The next item on the agenda is review of the May 5, 2020 Plan and Zoning Commission meeting discussion notes regarding accessory dwelling units. I mean, I obviously had this be like a free flowing discussion.
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to use the notes as a means to talk through certain things or get perspective from the Ordinance Review Committee first and then go through those, or
I guess I can kind of kick things off by giving you guys some background as to, you know, where we've come from as a committee. We do have other committee members that couldn't make it tonight. So we've been meeting for, I think, 6 months now. This month will be our 6-month mark. And so we are doing a review of all of our zoning ordinances. So, and I know it hasn't been that long since, as a team, the P&Z did the neighborhood businesses, and that, you know, went through council. So we've already made some adjustments to neighborhood businesses. And now we started to focus on residential being, you know, the biggest impact to the most people. So we kind of started with the residential zoning, and now we're at the point where we're really focused in on accessory units, ADUs, accessory dwelling units, granny flats, whatever we want to call it, because we think that that's something that we can get across the finish line this summer, ideally, is what I'd like to do. So this is kind of where your last meeting's conversation started with, about, you know, asking for the input of commission. And after that, our committee had a meeting. Unfortunately, last month, most of our committee members could not attend that. So we are here, I think, at your suggestion, actually, that we join you guys for the discussion for a work session. And, you know, I'll be honest, I've done just sort of as my background homework, and because I enjoy, you know, my heart never really left planning and zoning. So, so I've done a lot of outside reading and a lot of things like that. So that's kind of, you know, where I'm coming from, is this is not just about affordable housing. It's also about potentially multi-generational living and aging in place. And, you know, all of those things are potentially positive impacts for our community if we start to think more broadly about allowing accessory units in the spaces. We don't have a lot of spaces where there's enough space, but in you know, in the appropriate places. I would like to see us be as open-minded, well, and that's a weird way of saying it, but as permissive as possible. And I'd like to hear sort of the feedback from you guys, that if you think that we're going to hear it from the community, because as you know, most of the council is pretty progressive. So I don't think we're going to get a lot of pushback from council on this. So, you know, if you play devil's advocate, if you already have had conversations with community members or amongst yourselves, that's kind of what I'm looking for. That's where I'm in.
Well,
we soliciting comments now or?
I mean,
yeah, I think.
free
Is there?
format.
I mean, because I read I missed the last meeting, but I read through the notes
I was,
and everything.
yeah, I was gonna say, were some of the points that we've already brought up maybe to elaborate on?
And just to clarify, this was a distillation of the conversation we had.
Yeah. I get that.
Not a
The
transcript.
main point.
I want to know, I do financial work, I think in T accounting methods, I want the benefits and the detriments of it, so I create this column in my head. That's pretty much how I analyze everything. I'm having problems with the benefits. I know some aging in place would be great. But that would be for a relative or somebody, otherwise it's just a rental to John Q. Public.
Some opportunity costs and trade-offs to the league economics.
Yeah, opportunity costs is another way to look at it, but what are the benefits? Because I keep coming up with, I thought the intended was more affordable housing, but it's going to end up going at market rate anyway, if someone's going to build one or convert, maybe a garage if you can. I'm not sure. But all those details will be worked out. That I would assume it would just go for market rate, and the market rate's determined, by, the city, the county we live in, the state, you can go all the way up to geopolitical events to determine, has effects on all kinds of things. So I don't see how it would drive down the costs or make it more affordable.
Affordable part, I see as a little challenging, as well as the occupancy.
And then I'm looking for, I reverse engineered it, and the ideal communities would be like Aspen, Colorado, or Breckenridge, where no one can afford it because the whole city is $1 million homes or $500,000 condos.
Yeah.
So the people that work and play there, that work there, don't have a place to stay. So an accessory unit, around some of those houses, could go a long way to increasing the housing stock. If I analyze the housing stock in Maplewood, we already have a big varied choice selection to choose from. We have a ton of apartments, just my street. If you take my street, I'm 3500 block at Cambridge. It's 5 blocks long. I'm about in the middle of those 5 blocks. At the Big Bend end, there's probably 3 or 4 apartment buildings with maybe 60 units, maybe in there. I don't know, 40. I have no idea. If I had more time, I was going to suss out those numbers. But all the way at the other end at Commonwealth, right around the block, there's that little low-rise apartment building there. And in between the two edges, you have a whole variety. Some homes are big, some homes are tiny. There's one whole side of one block is townhomes or condos. So I think a lot of this is, you want to add options to the community. But I see those options already exist.
Does anyone know like the occupancy rate versus like?
Yeah, I want to know the housing density, the statistics, and I try to get on to the.
Let's say if we have 1,000 units, are
Yeah.
999 full or 500?
Well,
full?
if you.
Oh, the occupancy?
Yeah, I hear like from people I know that they want to move into Maplewood. So.
I'm thinking they're
wondering-
full.
And
There's
so.
nothing available.
No, there isn't.
Rental or purchase.
And so accessory dwelling units could, I mean.
Oh,
it's not
yeah,
gonna,
that drives pricing.
Let me add to your survey of your block on Cambridge.
Yeah,
There is also one house on Cambridge on the south side. Is that kind of east and west? It's not really. But let's just say east
for
side.
most part it is. It's,
Let's say the
split.
east side of Piccadilly.
yeah.
My brother owned it for a while, and my daughter lived there with her husband and eventually baby. No longer lives in Kirkwood, 20+ years, but there is a house in the back of one of those properties. And it is a full house with a basement
Yeah,
in the back. And even back then, you had to keep it rented to grandfather it in to occupy other people in there. And so they rented it for like $1 to someone, because my daughter wanted to actually use it to have her scrapbook meetings and stuff like that. They didn't know or want an outside person there. Eventually, other people owned that, which we knew about it, and a fella rented it and raised amphibians in the basement, snakes and
okay.
stuff. But anyway, a full house, fully plumbed and the whole thing. And amazingly with the basement. Now, my sister owned a property on Woodland in the back. And that was no basement. I mean,
It
it's
was
probably something that.
I
might
would guess
not
most of
have.
them are slabs, but the having the basement.
And probably questionable in terms of occupancy and stuff like that. So, I mean, there's that range, and those are the two properties I personally know about and know what people did. Now, the property where my sister lived on Woodland, the fellow that worked for, at the hardware store, who's the family, but Scheit, Bob Scheit. The guy that worked for him for years and years, went to high school with a bunch of us too. He's a single guy, lived there for years and years. And really the only thing he could have afforded on the salary that he was gonna get there. So the pluses, minuses and whatever, but I'm sure there's others in town. But like you say, there's not places, and for all that people talk about affordability, we're more affordable than our neighboring communities in a lot of ways, but things have just gotten more expensive, period.
I'd venture to say we're more dense. I tried looking up the
Yeah, we're pretty
statistics on
dense.
the
Yeah.
site, but I was no good at it and I didn't allow enough time, so I couldn't find it. But I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that Maplewood is probably on the upper end of density compared to,
Yeah.
other places,
Yeah.
other municipalities in town
And
in
we
St. Louis County.
had a housing corporation, actually, I was the first president of the Maplewood Housing Corporation. And those buildings down off of Yale and Lindover in there, that through the foundation, actually, the Maplewood Community Betterment Foundation, we got a huge federal loan to buy 3 buildings in there. Not the one that's closer to Manchester, but there were 3 in there, and now there's 2. And one side's on Lindover, the other is kind of around from Yale. And no one could make it viably possible at the time to buy 3 buildings and tear one down. They were too close together. I mean, some of those houses never saw sunlight in the windows. And they were all 1-bedroom apartments back in the day, right by the loop. People who worked in the city rented those apartments and then could commute to downtown and so forth where they worked. But all for just a single person or a couple, no children, obviously, or when they were inspecting. In some of those days, that's not what happened. But in any case, the building was torn down, and then we put in the lower level handicap accessible. The whole idea was they would be Section 8 housing. And again, affordable housing. We've been thinking and doing things about this for years. And so that place, it was derelict, and it was getting, drugs around and so forth. And we did that, and still it is, I believe, Section 8 housing. That's been a long time since I've had my fingers on it, but in any case, we have done, and then by the time we were ready to maybe go to some single family or duplexes, then the market started picking up and people started fixing up those places of their own accord, because they became viable properties that economically were worthwhile dealing with. And so, and since then, we haven't taken over any buildings to make them Section 8 or that kind of thing. I mean, if you want affordable housing, that's what affordable is. And I don't know what other, if we even have any other apartment places that are Section 8 or people in Maplewood, but I do know those two buildings are.
Well, I'm not sure, but I've thought about it, and to me, if I interpret this at first as the primary goal to be to create more affordable housing. And I couldn't see that happen because it's going to be market rate, and these are probably going to be new places. So, and if we look at what they're charging the new places for rental in Maplewood, that's sky high. But oh God, I just lost my thought. I was in the middle of it. Oh, well, I forgot, but I still have more to say about my little T accounting thing. I was going to. So I think one of the main goals of usually communities that do that is to increase the diversity of what they have in housing stock. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say we have the most diverse housing stock of any community. I mean, just on my street, we have houses from big to tiny. We have apartments from small to large, townhomes that are pretty large compared to the rest of the stock. There is just a tremendous variety in Maplewood, and that's great. If lowering cost or affordable housing is a big goal, the only way I see doing that is some subsidy program. That's my thoughts on that. And then another big concern of mine is we already have one of the densest populations, and that's manifest in trying to find a parking spot on your street. Some streets are way better than others. That said, some are way worse than others. I know this is personal to you, Sandy. I've heard you tell your story. And but I'm thinking if my street's fine. I don't put any cars on the street. I'm able to park all our cars in our driveway. But most everybody on our street can park in front of their house, which is fine. However, if 3 people put accessory structures there, and maybe that's just 3 cars or maybe 4 or 5, who knows, just even 3 would probably throw that balance out. And now you got like neighbor's got my spot, and I got to carry my groceries, an extra 100 feet, big deal. But that aggravates people, and so I don't know. I'm trying to get more in the plus column. Can somebody help me?
Well, I mean, the one thing, because I conceptually, I kind of agree with you that, is there the possibility that it will provide more affordable housing? Yes, but like the reality is that if someone's going to build a detached structure and spend Lord knows how much, $150,000 to construct an accessory dwelling unit, well, they're going to charge as much rent as they can. And that's just, but I think providing more housing stock and I think nicer, smaller housing units, I think there would be some benefit to that. But it also has to be in the right location. Is I think with kind of just with respect to,
and on the location part, I think we can rule out half the homes right now, I think. Because my neighbor across the street, they don't live there now, but like 15 years ago, he had the shed and he wanted to put a garage. He has a driveway, it goes all the way to the backyard, but it goes to a shed, and the city wouldn't let them put a garage because of the square footage. You gotta have the ratio. It wasn't setbacks or anything. You could get a variance for that. And he couldn't, I don't know how hard he tried on getting a variance on the ratio. But he couldn't build a garage, so he couldn't build an accessory structure. And I know that out of, let's say there's 20, 25 homes on my block. There's only 5, maybe 6 that are 60 feet wide. All the rest are 30 feet wide. And I don't think that's square footage of all the rest. So there's 6 people on my block that potentially have enough square footage to do this. I mean, once it's in, I know sometimes on the codes when they're written, you liberalize those. I don't know if you want to liberalize the setback, but you might liberalize the ratios and other things like that. If your desire, if you want it bad enough, then you liberalize some of that.
And that took up some time of our discussion.
Okay.
How we would decide what the square footage minimums and maximums were for the structures, the distance from the home, the distance from the lot line.
Yeah,
With a comprehensive ordinance review, I think our goal is to adjust whatever we need to adjust in order to make that make sense. But I think
Yeah.
you'll see in the notes, there were a lot of questions like how should we, is it by the number of people who are going to live in the dwelling? Is it by the size of the lot? Different cities have approached it in different ways. So I think there's more work to be done here in terms of the recommendation that the
yeah,
review committee would put forth. But I would just say to sort of support the conversation around, pros and cons. I think from my perspective, sitting on both P and Z and the ordinance review committee is thinking deeply about what do we really lose in doing this?
probably parking spots, and maybe other negatives of higher density. Higher density has positives and negatives.
Yeah. So I was really trying to look at the lens of what do we lose versus what do we gain.
Uh-huh,
I think from the
Likewise.
perspective of someone who's serving as a school board member and hears chronically about displacements and there's opportunity for growth in our school district and there's limited options for people to access that. So what are some ways that we can increase density that, again, market rate will dictate the cost of these units. But if we have more housing available, does that overall have an incremental impact on what the market rate is?
Mhm.
It may not be significant, but I think, in the conversations we've had in ordinance review, we're looking at a number of things that we might touch in order to make this community more accessible, increase the density. And like you say, we already have a lot of options. We do have a lot of diversity in our housing stock.
Oh, extreme
yeah.
diversity.
Which really has made this an accessible community. I think that really
Yeah,
is what makes us notable among our neighbors. And
I
yet
agree.
We see that kind of being threatened.
but I don't see a huge amount of plus side in increasing the density. I think we're already in the sweet spot on density. We're a pretty dense community, I believe.
I took a look at my own property and I was raised in the house I live in. I have not always lived there, but it's the house, so I know it as a kid and so forth. There is a slab in the back of and I've got blacktop for, my parents had 4 kids and they all married and had 2 cars. And so blacktop clear around to the back. And so, I mean, you can park and you can move cars around, but the garage was torn down and there's a concrete slab there and so forth. And I was thinking, well, what would it take and what would it be to build a little house there? And it could be, I don't know about the setbacks because it was old days when it was built in 1910. Anyway, but so there's infrastructure things like plumbing and so forth. And I know the plumbing problems, we've had different ones of us having things dug out and so forth. You're gonna have to install plumbing in the back of the property, tear out all things all the way to the curb and, do this, do that, whatever. Okay. You can think of all different scenarios where that's interesting or not. I also know of properties that are big enough, something could be way in the back, but the access to it for things like police, fire is a big thing. I am so glad I'm in a part of town where there's driveways in between each house in case I have a fire, my neighbors have a fire. But we've got places on Walter and so forth that are this close together. Fire is not
Well, a lot
a
of
good
homes
thing.
don't have some driveways.
Exactly.
There's quite.
And so a fire in one building means, and we've seen it, where it takes one house and it takes maybe the next one too, and so forth. You got safety.
And back to the water,
And-
the waste is a big thing, the sewer line.
Yeah, the amount it can,
We're all
draw.
on clay pipes that are.
Yeah,
100
yes.
years old.
so
And then
that,
you can't just want to add capacity to that.
yes, there's capacity things there. Now, flip side of that. I am totally in favor of having places where people can afford. I mean, I went to a church, I'm back at my Maplewood Methodist Church now, but the Methodist Church in U City, the college was taking over all the properties up there and of the university rather. And the people, the wait staff and the people for all their long on Del Mar didn't have any, they'd all lived in the neighborhood and could be back and forth there. And all of a sudden, all that, those people had no place to live, to work for the people in there. And so I know about that kind of situation where the dynamic of the community so changes that even your service people don't have a place to live. And we all know stories of places like in New Mexico, Santa Fe, or in Colorado, that are, Seattle's an example. All the teachers in Seattle live in, was it Tacoma, next door?
Yeah.
And because they can't afford to live in the city of Seattle, that kind of thing. Now, the one thing that came to my mind, however, although we've started filling in a lot of our properties that are kind of in throwaway places, we just zoned for that place over off of Oxford and Big Bend, for instance. These guys know what I'm talking about. You know, the fellow that's redoing the one building and having the spaces and fixing a place that's been kind of junky and
An apartment.
Yeah, the
yeah.
Co-work.
Yeah, but a space like that, I was very interested in what I saw, and I think they did this in Los Angeles. And really, it was for homeless people, but you don't have to be, but you know about tiny homes and so forth. But they created a section that had just small homes. And so then the whole thing got plumbed and the whole thing, the services and how the things and how it was all managed was a number of places, and I think it was like 24 even, and where people that needed that kind of housing could be there, so on and so forth, with all the air conditioning, heat, the whole 9 yards. And I'm sure it was subsidized some way. I didn't get into it deep. But really to get places, and they don't have to be like that because that was purely for homeless people. It had security also, that kind of security and stuff. But there's no reason we couldn't think of doing some kind of planning that was in an area that accommodated smaller housing units and just take a swath of a piece of property and literally make small units for people to be able to rent and decide the size we need. Now, when you're talking about the school district, I've also been on the school board before. As far as we hear things in the school district, those are people with children. And so smaller places or backyard places, that's really not a thing either, because they have kids. So you're talking
Well, I mean, if you
2,
have,
4, 6 people.
if you have a
Yeah.
1,200 square foot house or unit with 2 bedrooms.
My house isn't even that big.
No, but
We do
I'm
have
saying.
families living in one bedroom
Yeah,
apartments
yeah,
right now.
yeah.
Right.
In order to be able to attend
To be able
this.
to-
Right. Well, that does happen, but I don't know how that is in terms of
I'm gonna throw this
Thanks.
out there
So-
because it's something
there's
that
certainly a range of possibilities.
it's something that you guys may not be thinking about, but just to throw this into the mix of. So someone who wants to age in place in Maplewood right now has very few options. So for instance, in Pickett's case or former Councilwoman Karen Wood, you know, enormous house on Euclid Station. She's in that house by herself right now. If she were allowed to build an ADU in her backyard, she could potentially move herself into that space, all single level, you know, small house, and rent out her big house to a family with children. So that does potentially increase our density or increase our affordability because it allows her to stay in the community that she loves while still, you know, maybe it's she's renting it to her, you know, her grandchildren.
I didn't
but-
think of that. That's a great
Yeah.
idea. I mean, because usually you think of the owner of the big house and then
Yep.
the ADU being the rental. But,
Yeah.
That makes, that's a great
Because, I
idea.
mean, you think about we have lots of really big houses with single people or couples living in them. And then, you know, and then you have the opposite spectrum where we have, you know, small apartments, things like that. But the new build apartments, certainly their market rate and that market rate is escalating pretty quickly because those units, as you know, I mean, they come with all the amenities. They've got the fitness center, the dog park, the
Yeah.
swimming pool, everything, all of that. Not everyone who wants a small space wants all of those amenities either. So-
No, but once back to the diversity of the housing stock in Maplewood, we do have the luxury apartments and we also have crappy ass apartments.
Yeah.
We have, and everything in between.
Yeah.
We do.
Although those crappy ass apartments are eventually, probably sooner than we would like to think, going to be no longer crappy ass apartments.
Well, yes and no. I mean, my wife just made a new friend and she lives in an apartment here in Maplewood. And boy, she just went on and on about how crappy it was and what the landlord does and doesn't do. And I just thought, our first question was, are they getting the annual inspection from Maplewood? Because every apartment or rental house and everything needs to be inspected, and it sure sounded like they weren't. But I don't. This was one person, and it could have just been they were venting. But my point was that we have the full spectrum in single family homes as well. You know, we have big stately homes, and then we have real small homes that maybe are have a lot of deferred maintenance. And then we have apartments that have a lot of deferred maintenance, and then some that are brand new. I did want to question, is it, Amber, you mentioned something at the school board. Is it their goal to have more households? Or is that?
That's not an explicit goal. I will say that we are, as has been reported, losing diversity, socioeconomic and racial diversity within our school district, and we have been over the
Oh.
years. And that's a concern. Absolutely.
So it's a diversity.
Our racial diversity, though, has heavily come from Richmond Heights, unfortunately. I have black
I'm
families
surprised
and
that so
Asian
we're
families
losing
on my
race.
block, but that's not true, and it hasn't been historically that much. At sections of, and we can go clear back to when Lincoln grade school was segregated up there in parts of Richmond Heights, and there's a number of smaller homes up there, but people have historically even stayed in those homes. I know some people in my class reunion, 50th class reunion, the family, they grew up in those houses and are still there, because I went to the door of some folks to be sure they were invited, because we have a hard time getting our African-American friends and classmates sometimes to even come to things from back in the day. And but our diversity at our school is that we are Maplewood and Richmond Heights School District, not just Maplewood. So I mean, I don't know how much I preached on the various things I've sat on about recruiting people, color, people of diversity, get them involved, so forth. You have to reach out. You can't think that people are just going to walk in a room with a bunch of white people, because I have a history of working in diverse places. I was married diversely, very diversely. And Where that diversity is lacking, I'm not certain is necessarily, you'd have to have the numbers
We're
necessarily
quickly
where it
moving.
Well, I'm
is.
sure the
I think
school
I
board
was
has the
trying to-
numbers. I wasn't aware that the diversity is decreasing.
Yeah, and so could socioeconomic.
Socioeconomic.
Well, I know
That was
socioeconomically, it's
definitely-
probably going up, is that,
Yes,
Yeah.
and becoming less stratified.
yeah, so I think, I just simply bring that lens to this conversation. It isn't the goal of the school board or the goal of the school district. Obviously, as a school district, we want to enrich educational opportunities and a diverse population.
Correct, I agree,
Of
yeah,
course.
yeah, that makes sense.
But that's simply.
But
one
it's not so much
dimension.
you just want more housing units or more households for the school district.
I think we're very proud of the job we do in the school district and we want more children.
Oh, well, the reputation speaks for itself, I think, so.
And seeing the
But the-
different outcomes between kids in the city and kids in MRH.
Yeah,
we would
I mean, you
obviously
get
want
too
that.
many more households and you gotta build more,
Right.
you know,
But we'll
and more
have-
bond
we'll have a
issues.
bigger
That's a good problem. That's a-
Right.
I'm getting old enough.
We already sold
I'm getting
off
old
one of
enough
our
where I'm gonna
buildings.
start voting no on the bond.
My mother-in-law is attempting to
I've,
age in place. and I
I've
don't-
done 5 so far since I moved to Maplewood, and I've always
We're
been in
trying
the
not to.
affirmative, so,
It is definitely.
but we
something
are increasing, I mean, that second building of apartments is going up there in Sunny. That's not gonna increase the diversity.
Not the socioeconomic.
And not the
diversity.
socioeconomic.
No, that's for
Not
sure.
Not for what they're
And
renting
the
those
way-
for.
And the way those apartments are built, they have very few 2-bedroom apartments. They're mostly studios and 1-bedrooms. And I mean, you guys will remember the very first, when they came to this commission, before
Right.
they were even.
So they're
apartment
single
houses.
transients,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
I mean, they're geared
Young.
towards young professionals.
Yeah,
yeah.
Couples.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're really, and that was, their whole pitch. Certainly when they came to council asking for more money, which we didn't give them, was that it's not going to put undue burden on the schools because there are very few 2-bedrooms. So, the expectation was not to have an apartment complex full of children. So it's definitely just in my time, the years that I spent on this commission and the years that I've been in council so far, I mean, we've all experienced the rapid increase in our property values. And that's another reason, the whole idea of aging in place. I mean, I've seen so many neighbors that can no longer afford their property taxes, can no longer afford the electric heating, all of those things in the large houses that they're currently living in, and they can't find another place in the.
No, and your anecdote about the fellow council member and the house on McLeod Station Road was great, and that makes perfect sense. And, that's a plus. I'm looking for more pluses.
Yeah.
Because I can
What
come up
about-
with negatives all
so,
night long.
Here's
What are
another.
some of the cons? What are
The
some of
cons,
Yeah. what are some of the-
well, just increasing density for density purposes. What does that achieve? It achieves parking issues on the street. It achieves more neighbor interactions, maybe more.
So parking could be a negative and potential.
It's already a problem on my block.
Traffic, with just plain density, you do get some negatives there.
Because really, when I'm thinking about this, we're not talking about 1,000, even 100.
Well, I don't think a lot would
people.
qualify.
We're probably talking
Yeah.
about 20.
Yeah.
all of Maplewood. So when I look realistically, it seems like we're not going to solve every issue, but it will bring at least a little bit more of an opportunity for people who want to live in the Maplewood to do that without, at least when I look at it, I don't see it being a huge detriment.
The
Well, yeah, and those numbers.
Yeah.
But if, and I don't think, like I said, on my block, many homes would qualify, so it probably wouldn't.
So even if, let's just,
Disrupt the
I mean, I'm
park.
just thinking, and I think would never happen. Let's say each block has one ADU, which I doubt. So let's say it has one ADU, that could be potentially 2 more cars. Potentially.
Yeah,
And I understand like the parking and stuff, but I think the positives of the ADU would weigh out parking issue or the have to.
Yeah. Oh, we're very car centric right now. I think we'll get away from that. in the
Yeah,
future.
yeah. I was
And
gonna say, we're
and we're
definitely
looking to
headed
the
that
future.
way.
Yeah, I mean, we're a one car household right now. So,
And as far as the aging in place, that is also, I'm sorry to talk so much, but that's my bailiwick as well. And the biggest problem in these big houses, my taxes aren't what's gonna kill me. And I have a retirement better than a lot of other people do. But to put another, I think, well, to put another piece, say a house on that back place, and I would move into there. Wasn't gonna happen, but that I would move in, that I build a place. But if I think what things cost, we have a new family, in fact, it's an African-American family, right corner from my church, because I met the lady with her darling toddlers walking down Elm to go around over to Flora, the one on the corner of Flora and Sutton. Big house, great big house. And they've done it piece by piece by piece, but part of that has been the costs of like a piece of lumber. I mean, I had a piece of lumber to use to some repairs, and it cost me $500 to get people to come in and use a piece of lumber, and they carry the rest of it away because it was gold, to replace some wood that had rotted and things like that. But just the cost of even expanding something like that for someone who is trying to age in place, unless they've got rich kids that are going to support that, that is also not going to happen. What the biggest issue for the people in these houses is the bathrooms on the first floor, so they can stay in their house, physically
Or the
stay in
lack
their
of
house.
Well, that's gonna be
That's what I
mine,
mean.
because my wife and I, this is our forever home. However, we have one bathroom like this upstairs. We don't have a bathroom downstairs.
Well,
So
I
I'm
do.
gonna have to either put an addition on, and perhaps I'll have the opportunity of doing an ADU when I get ready to pull that trigger.
Well, and I have a side entrance to my house that can also be another address. And I have a full, very dry basement. And I more likely could do, if I needed the money or the space for someone. In fact, my sister and her new husband at one time lived down there, probably off the grid in those days, because it was in the 70s. But anyway, there's a lot of things there that are very unique to each situation.
Right.
And so to legislate things broadly in terms of what's allowed or what isn't, there's so many, to me, cons as well as pros for doing that. And trust me, I really like to have places where people who are trying to make it and so forth. I, at one point, had kids with single mom making it, and I tell you, beginning teachers don't make what teachers do once they retire, even in the day, to try to put it together, lived clear in Illinois in order to have a place to drive over to St. Louis City in order to work and have a place for my daughter and I. So, yeah, it's tough. And this community has some spaces. I wish some of the neighboring communities were as progressive as we are, because they'd be much more able to accommodate some of the things we're talking about, which I think are wonderful, than possibly here. If we don't have a place that's got for families with moms with 2 kids or things like that, maybe we need to work toward there being places like that, without just waiting for people also, because if we need them, we need them. Waiting for people to have the epiphany that they're gonna have the money and they're gonna put up with the whatever it takes to build it and whatever it takes to have people and so forth. My brother owned and rented 16 properties in this area, Richmond Heights, Maplewood, into Webster Groves. And so some of the real estate companies can tell you the challenges of, and we've had back and forth with management of those buildings when we were managing them over off of Yale too. And it's not an easy thing to have rental property. So.
Have we thought about like the building zoning section, what liberalizations we might apply to achieve?
We've thought about it. I think we've all thought
It's
about
all
it.
a work in
individually.
progress.
Yeah, yeah, and we've, I've had conversations with Anthony. I know Brian has weighed in on some things.
What are some of the ideas?
Well, I mean, the other aspect of that whole lot coverage and setbacks and all of that is I also don't want us to become a Webster Groves where people are tearing down small houses and building McMansions. So, you know, when you're talking about lot coverage and things like that, that's another like dangerous area. If you're talking about a lot coverage, increasing the lot coverage to add an ADU.
Then
versus-
you're having exposure there, is what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah.
I see
People
that.
just come in
so-
and build big
Yeah.
houses.
So it's, you know, you're talking about 1,200 foot unit and that, or, you know, a garage versus what most people would think of as a shed. You know, there are some tiny homes that are the size of sheds and that's what people live in. There are some apartments in Manhattan that are the size of sheds. and that's what people
A
live in.
lot of them in Manhattan.
So, you know, there's definitely, I know there's always issues when we talk about parking in Maplewood, because that is, you know, that's
Yeah,
the,
I think that is a consideration.
yeah. But it is also, and you even mentioned it yourself, that's going to be less of a consideration the farther into the future.
I
we
welcome
go.
the day for self-driving cars and cars are a service.
Not even
That we
that.
just,
not even
it's
that.
essentially you Uber everywhere.
I'm just
you know,
talking about-
But it's a self-driving
I
car.
mean, Chris and I are down to one.
We'll be there someday.
You know, we only have one car now, and it's, you know, we walk everywhere.
Yeah.
We, you know, we walk, we Uber or Lyft, when we want to, we take Metrolink. It just doesn't, you know, we're not the same. As a community, we're such a walkable community.
Yes.
And I know, I mean, I know just within my own little network, probably 6 or 8 different couples that either don't have a car at all or only have a car to, you know, to drive out of town.
Pick up heavy objects.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah. So, and I think that's definitely the future. I mean, you know, kids now are not even getting their driver's license because, you know, it's expensive. You don't necessarily, when you live here, you don't need a car, which
Yeah.
is the beauty of where we live.
Yeah.
So I think parking is going to become less of an issue. I think the larger spaces, the larger homes, certainly for families with more kids who can afford those larger homes, will remain desirable. But I do think there's a market or whatever you call it for people who want to live in Maplewood.
Traditionally, there wasn't good housing stock in Maplewood for the growing family.
Mhm.
Once you hit 2 kids, if you had a third one, you're out, you're moving the ball in or whatever.
Yeah,
Because there just wasn't a lot of those
Yeah.
homes in Maplewood.
yeah.
Have them, but they're not the quantities.
And now they're definitely cost prohibitive for a lot of people.
Yeah,
I mean, just people on my own street have opted to move out because, you know, as you mentioned, the cost of supplies, you know, they looked at adding on to their houses and couldn't afford to do it. So they moved to,
I'm waiting for lumber to go way down.
yeah.
Oh, man, it's up there.
Ironically, one of the couples moved to Kirkwood. I'm like, okay, you
Yeah.
can't afford to build on your house in Maplewood, but you can afford to move to Kirkwood.
Yeah.
And that's,
Well, it's financing, how you can finance that too, that's a part of the issue.
yeah.
And I do think we are increasing our reputation as a community of people who may not necessarily feel like they need a 3,000 square foot home to have a family of 4. But there are people who seek to invest their resources elsewhere.
Yeah.
Well, I've never seen so many houses bought and sold on my block. And now I'm the gray hair of the block. It used to be all old, quote unquote, old people on 7200 block of Elm. And now, the houses from me, I'm fifth house from Sutton. And those houses and I bought the house after my mother passed in 2000. And since I've actually owned the house there, the houses between me and the corner have all turned over 2, 4, 6, and across the street, 2, 3, 5. The ones across the street are bigger houses and fewer because there's a business on the corner. 10, 12 times because people, they have more kids and whatever, and then they do better economically and they move to Kirkwood, Webster Groves, places like that, if they like the more inner ring of 270, or go clear out to, now I didn't even know there was a St. Paul. Now, I knew about St. Peter's, but now they've added on places.
Well, if they're moving for
St. Paul.
kids, they're gonna specify a school district. They're gonna move them in their school district.
Partly, but I will tell you, our school district has a tremendously good reputation.
It does.
And so certainly it's a combination of things. I know my daughter lived here in Maplewood and then they bought in Kirkwood. It was because of the school district. Having lived there, she's kind of about that too. I mean, once you're there, what the reputation and the reality sometimes are two different things. But the ones that are way out West County were not that great of districts, but Francis Howell, for instance, has started doing much better. Being a retired administrator, educator, I know about those two a little bit. But anyway, some of it is just, these are your starter houses for a lot of people, is my point. And they do turn over. But another reason they turn over is because they could buy it and then they sell it and then they've got the down payment for the next house because the cost has jumped. I mean, the value has jumped of these houses. I mean, I can't believe what I paid for my house at fair market rate when I bought it, and my brothers and sisters all got their piece of what, my mother left. And my house is worth 3 or 4 times what it was in 2000. And so, but my taxes, I can't say my taxes are horrible compared to a lot of places, but to some people it might be. Yeah.
So let's, can I suggest refocusing towards what people would envision if let's say we're going to allow the ADUs to be done in Maplewood. I mean, what kind of limits, what kind of application process? Does it go before, design review? Does, are we, do you place a minimum or maximum on on the size of the structure? I mean, and I'm curious too, to know what has the ordinance review committee discussed? Because I think Amber captured a lot of what we discussed, but there's different, there's
The minimums can get pretty low on some of those.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to go it's a super tiny houses.
I would think, I mean, again, I think at least those of us that have had the conversations, continuing to keep the process with planning and zoning as a conditional use, so that, you guys are the first level of review of, what impact is it going to be on the neighborhood and the parking and all of those things, and keeping that within P&Z, and then potentially also design and review is, if it's a new structure. I mean, I built a new garage and I had to go to design and review.
we put on a new deck with a pergola, and they were like, you got to go before design and review.
Yeah.
So if you're going to be building a
Yeah.
house in your
Yeah.
backyard.
I mean, that's how neighborhood does it.
Yeah, that goes without saying.
Yeah, that it
Yeah.
goes.
And then, I mean, on a parallel path, the whole idea of, are we going to allow them to be used as Airbnbs? And that, my opinion is that's another process, that if someone wants to build it as an ADU, they have to jump through all the hoops in the ADU. And then if they also want to use it as an Airbnb, well, then they've got to go through that process. And that's, they're two separate but equally important issues.
Yeah, my impulse is to say no Airbnb, but that's just me personally thinking. However, we have problems. I mean, we have that, we already approved Airbnb and the one over there by Ward 1. That was like a garage that was remodeled into a house. So it's the same thing. It's an ADU.
Right.
It's a perfect example of probably what we
Yeah.
want.
Yeah.
But it's being operated as
Yeah, yeah.
a Airbnb.
But then you think with Airbnb, then are we defeating our purpose? That was the
I think
original
that,
purpose?
I'd say
Yes
I
and
would
no,
waive
yeah.
the fee if they're
Yeah.
all Airbnb.
Yes, I mean, and
There's
that's,
always a risk of that.
Yeah.
That it becomes a
Yeah.
speculative.
But I don't see the distinction really between building a accessory structure and say, building out your basement so that it's like a separate rental unit, just conceptually. I mean, it's.
Airbnbs, you should-
Why let the person who says, I have a dry basement, I'm gonna put in a full bathroom and a kitchenette and rent it out for Airbnb, which we're gonna allow, and then you wouldn't allow it for, someone. who
And that
turns
was-
their-
Other than-
as a-
Other than you're working with existing space and existing footprint.
Right.
Yeah.
You're not expanding
Yeah.
that to increase the density
Sure.
and
You'd
make
still have the
your
same parking
Airbnb.
issue,
You'd
though.
still have the same part. you'd still have
Correct,
the same
the
part.
parking issue is the same.
Yeah.
However, on Airbnb, we have to regulate that they need to have a driveway
That
park.
they have to have an offset.
So, and I wouldn't be opposed to that with the ADU.
Yeah.
and that's, I mean, to circle back to the very beginning of our conversation, we were talking about the ones that are attached, whether it's in the basement or whether it's, already attached to the house, or whether it's, the second story that has a separate entrance, things like that. I would like to see that be included in the ordinances, that, if someone has a separate entrance and they want to create that as a separate living unit, whether it's going to eventually be an Airbnb or whether it's going to be, a mother-in-law suite or,
A JDU.
yeah.
Because you were saying your house could.
I think that is more doable than independent structure.
Mhm.
But
Creating
based on the
apartments.
average lot size in
Right,
Maplewood,
right.
I would say yes.
According to, yes, my house could be an Airbnb, but it could also easily be a basement apartment. And parking could even is accommodated in my house, because you can drive all the way in on that slab, or you can turn this way, and even two cars can enter and exit without being way of one another on the same driveway. But, and I imagine there's other houses in the community that are like that, where, but obviously there'd be different rules that would be if it was apartment versus like an Airbnb. And so different kinds of inspections or different kinds of things. The Airbnb with somebody on site
Mhm.
is so much more preferred in my mind than a separate building, because you're more on top of things as far as what's going on. And,
Well,
and those.
the owner being on, at least in my mind, how, if it were to become an Airbnb, the owner would still have to be on site.
Exactly.
Either whether they're in the main house or whether they live in the ADU and they're renting out the main house. I would still see that in the
Yeah, I
Airbnb
prefer that.
regulations.
Sure, because you've got temporary. people
Otherwise, you
there.
have investors or investment groups from California.
Yeah.
Turning this into just their investment.
Yeah, plus Party City or whatever.
But you had brought up something else before we went down this.
Well,
Digress.
because I think, I mean, at least to start out with, I think a conditional use
Mhm.
makes sense, just because we don't know what would be,
Well,
What-
that too,
what
and
we're
and you
dealing
can,
with. And like I said,
for each specific instance, you can
There could be-
tweak
yeah,
conditions.
there could be a perfect opportunity where it's a big lot where there's no one parks on the street, like the 7300 block of Maple, which is right next, one block over from my block. not a whole lot of cars on the street, there's
Yeah,
big lots,
lots,
there's
yeah.
big lots there. That might be an ideal, place for it, but then you talked about like Walter, or there's lots of streets, or a lot of like on the 7200 block of a lot of streets that don't have, they don't have driveways, they might not have an alleyway, so that.
Some
if
of
you
them
do-
even built too close, but we
Yeah.
can regulate.
My block's
new
fine, but
construction.
I'm on 3500, 3600.
Yeah,
It's
goes-
sketchy.
goes- yeah,
And I know, because I know the neighbors that live there. I have
And there's
friends
some,
on that street.
yeah,
And there's way more parking issues just one block away than this.
so I mean.
Well, Walter and Edgar, they even have a house that's like this far away from a chemical company. Remember, we had back and forth about that, and the
Yeah.
chemical company riled the neighbors up about what great neighbors were, and I said, fine, but they can grandfather. We just wanted to make it safe, because anything happens at a chemical company to a house that's this far away. I mean, they can't hardly even mow along that, so never mind, that's an aside.
I mean, I
So what-
foresee that the conditional use still remaining in place, that, it's still gonna come to P and Z, and it's still gonna go through council for approval, but it's not just gonna be a blanket, if you meet these requirements, you can do it.
And I think, yeah, and then I think it gives neighbors a sense of, if they're notified of it, then they can weigh in. If they have, 'cause some people might say, well, that's great, but.
And everything would have its separate regulations, right? Because, so that if they, these ADUs would be built as far as like setbacks and things like that, the danger of, then somebody said, well, if you only have to have that much setback, I'll buy this little house and just make a giant house on this smaller property. It would have to be limited to only this kind of construction
Yeah,
and
yeah.
a whole
I
layout
think the
of.
maximum square footage is what I would think of if you're building a separate structure.
Yeah,
Um,
that needs to be specified more than
Yeah.
a minimum.
Yeah, because, I mean, if somebody wants to, build out a bathroom into a shed, and somebody actually wants to rent it,
Yeah.
but, yeah, I mean, I personally wouldn't live in a house any tinier than the tiny house that I live in now. But,
Well, I think it's gonna require a lot of detail in terms of the quality of the construction.
But I think like 150 square foot for minimum, or could maybe even be 100. But that's only a 10 by 10, so
yeah.
10
Oh.
by 15. Well, people build these tiny ones these
Yeah.
days.
Oh, they exist,
So,
but
but let's just say 150, but what would the top end be?
Well, I think I mean,
Some
the
of-
size of the lot might, but then you could also do something like 50% of the square or the livable space of the main unit, or 1200 square feet, or some.
it,
type of
or
number
maybe,
like that. It's like
maybe
it's
related
more.
to the open space that the house does not
Yeah,
occupy,
the lot
how much,
coverage,
Yeah, you can do the lot
um,
coverage.
how much
too.
lot there is.
Yeah, there's many ways you could.
So is a way forward for the ordinance committee to come up with a recommendation
Yeah,
for us to dig in and work through?
Yeah, I know Anthony's already been working on it.
He's
and,
been working, yeah,
kind of,
when I talked to him
looking
last
at
week.
other cities.
He
and,
really knows,
Trying
yeah.
to do something that's gonna work for us. And that's the other thing is, when we're reviewing our zoning ordinances, there's so many of our zoning ordinances that you guys already know, were just like picked up from some suburbia somewhere and overlaid on ours, and they don't make sense at all.
no.
We don't have however many square feet on our lots in order to, my house is against the current zoning ordinances, just the way it sits as it was built in 1925. So, I.
Yeah,
certainly-
Mine was built to.
We're a patchwork,
Two
we're a
houses, right?
tremendous
And I redid
patchwork.
my porch, front
Mhm.
porch and construction. So I had to get a variance.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. Well, my garage
They
is a
accommodated
foot
it.
off the property line.
Yeah.
So,
I don't even know where my garage is, because I was
Yeah.
terrified to get a survey.
Yeah. So it's definitely it's a huge project, which I don't know if any of us really knew when we took on this project. A comprehensive review of all of our ordinances. I mean, it's something that the entire council agreed that we were gonna look at, and I, of course, volunteered for zoning.
Good for you.
Yeah. So there's other aspects that go along with that review, but certainly, when it comes to this, it was, hey, can we get this done this summer? And, to be honest, one of the reasons why I started to prioritize this is because, there's a person who lives actually in, Sean's ward where you guys live, and he basically added on his garage, and I haven't even seen it. I've only talked to him on the phone. He added onto his garage, assuming that he could use it as
Is
his
it the
wife's
house on
office.
Kensington?
Probably Luke.
Yeah, yeah. So
He did a nice job.
Yeah, but guess what? Because it's detached from the house, he couldn't put a bathroom in it, so his wife really can't even use it as an office, because, she's not gonna run from the garage to the house.
Oh, you can't
In the
put a
middle of
bathroom?
That's what
No.
we're talking
No,
about
that's the
here.
thing. is that
That's the
plumbing-
thing.
You
the
can put a bathroom in
Plumbing
your
makes it,
garage.
plumbing makes it a
An
separate
ADU.
dwelling.
Oh.
Makes
Yeah,
it a
That's how
separate
the
dwelling,
Yep.
regulations.
which is against the law.
Well, then you
So-
need to pass this.
That's all I needed to say.
Well, I have a garage.
I
thinking-
can't-
I saw Luke's
I can't-
shop.
I
live-
can't
live
tell
right
you how
around
many
the
things
block.
in Maplewood,
And he
there
did
was
it
one
nice. I
person-
actually photographed his
one person. who did
construction
one
company
person.
finally put a sign up, and
Yeah.
I was meaning to walk around the block and get their name.
How many things in Maplewood happened because one person knew one person who knew somebody on council or wherever, and it was passed because that one person wanted to do that thing. I'm telling you, back in the day, that happened a lot, and that's why we have such a patchwork.
According to Anthony, the city does field a fair number of inquiries about this.
Oh, no, I'm not saying now, but
Well,
I'm saying
you
we
know,
have
I
a real
talked to
patchwork.
my wife and I think we're in our forever home, except it's that bathroom upstairs that's gonna be the limiting factor, so. I either need to expand out my back, or I have a detached garage that's decent size,
Yeah.
so I could do a
See,
loose
the
job on
question here about would garage
And,
conversions be allowed?
I guess
Use
garage
the
conversions
ADU.
should.
I think they should be.
Yeah.
Because the structure's already there. I mean, my garage could be relatively easily converted. It's still,
Yeah.
new structure. Sure, I tear out the concrete, I put some, plumbing and sewer lines in there. And
I
voila.
can tell you, I've got a bathroom that's grandfathered in because it's been in there long enough. It wasn't legal when it was built, but now it's grandfathered in. It is not, it's in my first floor,
I
but
think
there
it's
is,
only grandfathered in if it was legal when it was built.
no, but I have to babysit it every winter because it's not over the basement.
Oh, yeah.
It's in the part of the house that was porches and closets and stuff. And it was built in that part of the
Drain
house.
it for the winter.
I know all about how to treat it like an RV.
Winterize it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think as you guys all know, none of this happens quickly, nor does it solve all of the problems, but I thank you all for your devil's advocacy, if that's a phrase.
We can always do that.
It is now.
Because, this is also, we want it to be as transparent as possible. And if this is something that, that we want to do as a community, I want to know what people who think differently than me are going to say before I sit up there and vote on something. So,
Well, it's gonna need to get more transparent than just this. Most people here are pretty, oh, well, these are good ideas and so forth until it's in my backyard. That's true of everywhere. And so it kind of just, they're gonna need some concrete examples of what that looks like, who can do it, when and how. And the cost range, I mean, I'd even do it like, okay, you have to have a certain standard of construction. You know, you can't make it out of cardboard. And it, or, you know, the kinds of standards that are required to build one of these things. And here's an example of one out of, I don't care where, but this is what the kind of quality would be and blah, 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 blah. And then people can be, it's real, it's not theoretical. And I'm not only thinking about front of my house where I've had to call our policeman because people are extended into my driveway trying to park 2 cars in front of my house. Because I don't know what kind of startup they're starting on the corner of Sutton and Elm. But there are dozens of cars sometimes there with a bunch of young people in business suits and computers and stuff trying to work upstairs over there. So, yeah, as long as I think we can make it real and clear, and each aspect of what somebody would ask would be a problem, we have an answer for. And that's no easy job.
Devils in the details.
Devils in the details. But then the details are what make it fly, I think.
Any other final?
Well, I came in originally with a pretty jaundiced view of ADUs, and I'm leaving with a better view, and especially with the bathroom thing.
You didn't know you couldn't put a bathroom in your.
I didn't.
That's what we're talking about here.
You may need an ADU at your house.
Can you put a bathroom in your?
There could be
garage?
one in the future. You never know. I need to do something for old age. I seem to get closer to it.
You ever want to have a conversation with me, every house I've lived in and family I have, how they have turned closets into bathrooms and all kinds of business.
Oh, at my first house on Flora, they turned, there was the split staircase. So the smaller staircase, the previous owner had just blocked it off, and we called it a quarter bath. It was so grandfathered in, it didn't have a sink. It was too small. It was just the
Toilet.
just
you had a powder room, though.
But no, but my wife found this thing that they make in Japan where they're very space limited, where it installs over the top of so it uses the water that you can wash your hands
Oh, yeah, over the toilet.
over the toilet.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it was
I've heard
funny
of that.
because I was like, it's a pain in the neck to then,
Yeah.
and kind of gross to walk into the kitchen
Yeah,
to
yeah.
then wash your hands. Yeah, and so, but there's all sorts. But I mean, I think whether it's Anthony or someone, or us or you or putting something on paper so that we can all start looking at it. Because like, I think talking and the brainstorming is good, but
Concrete.
there's gonna, once you see things together and see how they, and with the understanding it's a draft and it can be tweaked by whomever, and we can have another work session.
Yeah.
To hammer out
Or
details.
see if there's any loopholes.
Or see if there's, exactly.
Well, the other reason for recording tonight is because since Anthony couldn't be here, he's gonna watch the recording and sort of, take everything that we've talked about along with his own research.
His own research.
She's heard some of my stories already. It'll go fast.
So that way, he can draft something that is going to come back to you guys. And then, after those tweaks are made, then of course, eventually it'll make it to council. Which, like I said, I'd like to see this passed sometime this summer. But, we're going into summer schedule now with council, so we're only gonna have one meeting a month. So that's gonna
Summer will go fast, yeah.
Yeah, that's already June. I will say, if this is something that interests you, that this is a remarkable book. It is kind of about the history of the single family home and why we've become a culture who requires single-family homes when it is not necessarily sustainable in terms of, you know, how much resources single-family homes consume versus multifamily, nor is it the best thing for everyone's mental health to live in a
Versus
single-family
extended
home.
families, we used to have a lot. of
Yeah,
extended
yeah.
families.
So it talks about the history of multi-generational. It talks about
Yeah.
boarding houses, you know, back before the First World War. And, you know, how that was common for single people to live in a boarding house. So they were, you know, under the someone else's household. So yeah, really interesting book. And highly recommended if this is, if it's something that interests you guys. That's all I got for you. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Good luck. I'm no longer on P and Z after today.
Oh,
That's
really? I
true.
didn't know
It's
that.
true. This is
Yeah.
your last.
You're retiring?
I suppose so, yes.
Or taking a hike.
Yeah, either one, either way you want to look at it.
Should we?
I'm
Are we
on-
replacing you with anyone?
Yeah.
Well, I would assume they are.
I'm gonna go ahead and end the recording, just so.
Yeah.
Okay.